It originally started with wanting to do the Northwest Passage, and then the more I looked into the ice and the weather routing for that, the more I started to think, actually, I think it's possible to get the whole way around now.
Times dodging sea ice when the water generator can't be overboard.
Yeva's a gorgeous, beautiful boat, and she's a little tank, and she will get me around.
Trying with Ocean Conservancy through their Arctic programme to implement regulation across both the Laptev and the Kara seas, completing what we call the Northeast Passage.
There's been so much water that the bilge pumps physically couldn't keep up and burnt out.
Hi, my name's Ella Hibbert, and I'm going to be chatting to you guys about next year's attempt of the first ever single-handed circumnavigation of the Arctic Circle. I'm going to be undertaking this circumnavigation in an effort to raise awareness for climate change in the Arctic Ocean, showcasing and highlighting the decline of Arctic sea ice that we're currently witnessing, and bringing that sort of reality and that information home. I'm hoping to set a new world first by achieving the circumnavigation, and I'll also be raising money for two incredible charities whilst I do it, called Polar Bears International and Ocean Conservancy. So I'll chat about them a little bit more to you guys down the line. I'll also be undertaking some scientific research. The expedition has actually been endorsed now by the British Scientific Exploration Society, and I'm going to be doing both microplastic surveying and depth sounding of the seabeds, working with the International Seakeepers Society and the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton. And then last but not least, I hope to inspire some future generations to get involved with sailing, get involved with our oceans and conservation, and hopefully inspire more women in sailing as well. So I'm going to chat to you guys about who I am, what the boat is, who's supporting the project, and how this all got off the ground. So I'm a 27-year-old British woman, born in Germany, raised in France, but to British parents. And I've been living back in the UK for 4 years now, working as a sailing instructor, all around the Solent, but also down the south coast and over in Gibraltar as well. So I was actually the RYA's second youngest female yachtmaster instructor at the age of 25. And I've been a PADI dive master since I was about 21, 22 as well. So I've always been interested in the ocean, and I've worked at sea on and off for the last sort of 6 or 7 years now. The boat that I've chosen for the expedition is a steel ketch by Bruce Roberts Design, built in 1978. Her name is Yeva, which means life in Russian. She came with the name, and I found it fitting enough that I've decided to keep it. So Yeva is 38 foot long. She's 5mm of steel thick with a 12mm skeg. So a very robust sort of tank of a boat. Currently in Haslar Marina, which is our home berth over in Portsmouth Harbour. Yeva spent the first 6 months of 2024 in extensive refit, both in and out of the water, and has undergone about 5 or 6 weeks out of the water again over the last month, just fixing a couple of bits that I found that I needed to reinforce from this summer's sea trials and trainings that I undertook. The expedition I have been planning for the last sort of 3 years. I bought Yeva in 2022, but had already been thinking about this expedition and planning it for a little while before that. Now I have an incredible amount of sponsors all backing the project, about 20 sponsors altogether, and one incredible partnership with Capital.com, meaning that the expedition is fully funded now, and at a point where I am confident to say that we will be departing at the end of May, if not the very first week of June 2025. So this summer I went off on some training sails, sailing from the Portsmouth in England to Stavanger in Norway with the engineer who'd been a massive part of the refit, Rick from Blackbeard Marine. Rick then disembarked in Stavanger, and I sailed Jæver single-handed all the way up the Norwegian coast to Tromsø, before crossing the Barents Sea, heading from Tromsø to the world's most northern settlement in Longyearbyen in Svalbard. After a couple of weeks spent in Svalbard, I then sailed Jæver back down to Tromsø, through the Norwegian fjords, and across the North Sea again to Shetland, and then down to Inverness in Scotland. Next year, I'll be heading back up the North Sea that I've sailed across a bit now this summer, heading up to a start line between Norway and Iceland, sitting on the latitude of the Arctic Circle at about 66.5 degrees north. I'll then be turning west and heading around northern Iceland to make sure that I'm staying within the Arctic Circle's latitude, before dipping south of the Arctic Circle for the only time in the whole expedition to get around southern Greenland. Once I've got around southern Greenland, I'll be heading north again back up to into the Baffin Bay, which will see me enter once again the latitude of the Arctic Circle, which I will remain above for the rest of the circumnavigation. So I'll then head through the Northwest Passage. Now there's a good 6-7 routes through there that are possible ways of getting through the Northwest Passage. The exact routing will be defined by the ice and the weather reports that we find when I'm actually there at the time. I'll then head across the Beaufort Sea and around northern Alaska. I'll then cross the Chukchi Sea and enter the East Siberian Sea of Russia. I'll then have to cross both the Laptev and the Kara Seas, completing what we call the Northeast Passage, which is essentially all of northern Russia, before crossing into the Barents Sea, heading across the top of Norway once more, back to my start line between Norway and Iceland, completing then my circumnavigation before heading back down the North Sea to Portsmouth in England once more. So we're looking at about 10,000 miles for the circumnavigation itself, not including getting to and from the Arctic Circle, which I'm estimating to take between 5 to 6 months, bearing in mind that the whole circumnavigation is going to be entirely ice and weather dependent. There is a possibility of having to potentially stop and winter the boat over if there is too much ice to complete the circumnavigation in a single season. But if I can do it in a single season, I would estimate being finished somewhere in October time, 2025. So I spoke to you guys very briefly at the intro about Polar Bears International and Ocean Conservancy, who are two charities that I've chosen to support whilst doing this expedition. There's a couple of ways that we're supporting Polar Bears International and Ocean Conservancy, not just by telling everyone about the work that they're doing and spreading the word, but fundraising for them as well. I've actually made the decision at the end of my circumnavigation to auction my vessel. Jæver will be put up for auction in Haslam Marina. We'll have a big event for, hopefully, which should be amazing. And all of the proceeds, every penny that Jæver sells for at auction, will be equally divided between Polar Bears International and Ocean Conservancy. And that will be my way of giving back to the Arctic Ocean for my time spent there. It's a strange line to have to follow, whereby obviously I want to connect people to the Arctic Ocean and get people involved and get people to understand just how at risk this part of our planet is at the moment in the face of global warming and climate change. But what I'm not trying to do is inspire many more sailors to head up there themselves. I don't want people thinking, oh, if Ella got the whole way around, then we can too, so we should go and do it. You know, the Arctic isn't supposed to be turned into some new racing ground for sailors to be setting records for tourism to be moving into. And quite frankly, the increase of tourism into the region is one of many issues that the Arctic is up against, along with increased oil and gas drilling as the ice recedes. So Polar Bears International, obviously it's quite self-explanatory who they are championing and campaigning for. And Ocean Conservancy are trying to set in laws now that are going to regulate the increased shipping traffic heading up into the Arctic. So the cruise ships, the container ships, the oil drilling. At the moment, the Arctic Ocean is very ungoverned, and we're trying with Ocean Conservancy through their Arctic programme to implement regulation across every country that borders the Arctic Ocean, to place areas of natural reserve, to make sure that every ship heading up there carries enough oil spill kit, for example, to make them self-reliant in event of an emergency. Obviously, the Arctic is such a hugely remote part of the world that we need to be making sure that we regulate the increased traffic flow that's happening as the ice recedes. So yeah, by auctioning Yeva, I will be helping these charities continue their work, and I think they're both two very good, worthy causes of our support. So something else that I've got on board Yeva to try and minimise my impact in the Arctic is sustainable technologies, and quite a few of them. Now, something I want to showcase with where I'm going, what I'm doing, is that sustainable technologies now, certainly for sailing yachts as well, have reached a point where they are so good that there isn't really any reason that every boat doesn't have them, other than a financial contribution, obviously, which we're aware of. You know, these things don't always come cheaply. But as investments to make for our ocean health, for long-term sailors and cruises, for your liveaboard vessels, charter yachts, you know, any boat around the Med and the Caribbean and the UK, there are sustainable technologies out there worth investing in and worth looking into. And I want to showcase that if these technologies have reached a point where they can survive a season or two in the world's most harshest environment, you know, if I can sail around the Arctic Circle using these technologies, there's no reason that they shouldn't be used more widely across the UK and the Med. So in order to save myself some fuel, I have installed a hydrovane on Yeva. So the way that's going to save me from using too much diesel is that essentially the hydrovane doesn't need any electricity to work. So it's a self-steering unit that sits on the back of the boat that not only steers the vessel to a wind angle, but can also work as an emergency rudder, which is something that I had to find out this season when I was in the Barents Sea 2 days away from Svalbard, and Yeva suffered total steerage failure. Luckily for me, I had the hydrovane and could steer on that for the next 2 days to get myself into Svalbard, where I was able to jury-rig a fix to Yeva's steering that managed to get me back to Scotland. But anyway, because the hydrovane doesn't need any electricity to run, I'm not going to have to be using my engine to top up my batteries to run an autopilot. So that's a pretty special bit of kit that I'm really enjoying. Yeva is also equipped with a desalination unit. Now, I didn't use that so extensively this summer on my sea trials because I was never really away from port for more than about a week at a time. But that desalination unit is going to be instrumental to the success of the circumnavigation, enabling me to keep moving pretty much continuously to make the timings with the ice in the summer months, meaning that I don't have to carry copious amounts of plastic water bottles on the boat, but I also don't have to go into port to top up my water. Really, really cool bit of kit from Rainman. Yeva also has a wind generator, a solar panel and an arch above the cockpit, and a piece of kit that I've really, really enjoyed this summer, which is a sail generator from Eclectic Energy. So the sail gen is basically a water generator, a propeller that spins through the water. And if I'm sailing over about 3 knots, that generates enough electricity for me to be able to run my fridge, my radar, pretty much all of the electrics on board that you can think of. A really, really clever bit of kit. Now, obviously, it's a lot. You know, it's a lot of kit. Not every boat in the UK or the Med or the Caribbean would need every single piece of this on the same boat. But I wanted it for redundancies. So there's going to be times when there's no wind and the wind generator wouldn't be as helpful as the water generator would be. There'll be times dodging sea ice when the water generator can't be overboard, and then the wind generator and the solar panels will pick up the slack. So that's kind of why I've gone for such a variety of equipment. But consider looking into one, at least, of these pieces of kit for your own boats. There are some pretty epic pieces of technology out there now that I think should be more widely spread. So moving on to how you guys can support. If you are interested in finding out more about my expedition, there's quite a lot I haven't mentioned yet. It's hard to fit everything in on one chat. But please look up my YouTube and my social media accounts, which you can find at Ella in the Arctic. Please feel free to reach out if you're interested in any sort of collaboration, whether it's artistic or journalistic or anything like that, whether you'd like an in-person talk at an event or a club or schools, that sort of place as well. Please consider donating to Polar Bears International and Ocean Conservancy. And above all, please spread the word. Thank you very much for listening.
There you are. Thank you so much. I was so excited for tonight's talk, and you did not let us down. It sounds absolutely incredible, but I also learned so much as well. Obviously, I know a bit about the Antarctic and what sailing is like in Antarctic waters, but where everything is regulated so strictly, I couldn't believe to hear that it's hardly regulated at all in Arctic waters. What was the inspiration that kind of sowed the seed or the idea for this project? Like, what gave you the idea that you were going to do this and it was going to be you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated by the Arctic and what's happening up there. The better I got at sailing, the more sailing became a way of potentially getting up there and seeing some of it for myself. But it originally started with wanting to do the Northwest Passage. And then the more I looked into the ice and the weather routing for that, the more I started to think, actually, I think it's possible to get the whole way around now. And then it sort of snowballed into this crazy massive campaign where everyone seems to think that we might stand a chance of doing it as well. But it's it stems from a personal goal of wanting to see it before it's gone. Some scientists, I don't know if you know this, but some scientists are estimating that the Arctic Ocean could be entirely ice-free in the summer as early as 2050, which means that I could sail around the ice as a circumnavigation next year, age 28. And before I'm 50 years old, I could sail from Scotland to Tokyo across the top of the world, because the North Pole will no longer physically be there during the summer months. So once I learned about that and the urgency behind, trying to conserve the Arctic, the more it grew and grew into this campaign.
Gosh, yeah. I've got a question now from Martin then, which he wants to know more about what happened with your shakedown passage where your boat flooded. I think we all want to know that story.
Yeah. Well, oh God. Yeva, Yeva's a gorgeous, beautiful boat, and she's a little tank, and she will get me around. But she has a fatal design flaw, whereby there's no drainage outboard from the anchor locker. Now, I knew about this before I set off. What I didn't realise was because neither of the two previous owners have ever taken the boat properly offshore, it wasn't until I was in 5.5 metre breaking waves in the Barents that we realised quite how much water would get in through the anchor locker and then drains into the centerline bilges of the boat, which are hollow. So she's got a draft of 1.75 metre, and she was letting in so much water that the bilge pumps physically couldn't keep up and burnt out until all of the draft of 175 was flooded to the floorboards. And I was left manually pumping us back into port. So one of the things that's starting this week in the shipyard now is to weld over that drain that leads into the centerline bilges and get normal, drainage holes above the waterline for the anchor locker, with those little sort of shell-shaped covers that you see on the bows of most boats, and get it to drain directly outboard rather than inboard. It was a bit of a nightmare. The fact that it happened at the same time as we lost steerage was just bad luck.
Oh my goodness. Were you solo at the time?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Like, all in all, that's probably a pretty useful experience to have, and must have raised your confidence in your own abilities like a fair bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I became quite good friends with my hydrovane during those next 2 days, which I hadn't, properly sort of tried to sail the boat to the best of its ability on, I suppose. I was using it more for getting my 20-minute sleeps, and then and then go back to hand steering. So yeah, definitely polished my skills on the hydrovane. Yeah, the steering was another thing. The rudder quadrant and the rudder shaft are joined together by a key lock, a male to female sort of groove, and 4 grub screws that hold it together. And obviously the 4 grub screws weren't enough to withstand the sort of waves and the bashing about that we were getting, so it got slammed all the way off the keychain, the keyway, until the male groove was no longer in the female connector, and I had no steerage, because both the mechanical arm for the outside steering and the hydraulic arm for the autopilot connect to that one rudder quadrant. So there really was no way of fixing that where I was at the time. So if any of that had happened in the attempt of the circumnavigation, rather than postponing the extra year, that would have definitely put a damper on plans. So we're back now, getting those sorted, and then I'll go out and test them in some heavy weather in the English Channel in January, hopefully, and make sure that it's all going to withstand what it needs to next year.
And the hydrovane's pretty sturdy, hey?
Yes, yeah, wonderful, wonderful.
You mentioned the remit for your boat needed to be less than 40 foot and steel. Why those constraints?
So I think the 40-foot thing for me was more of a sort of confidence in the size of boat that I could handle. This is, believe it or not, my first single-handed voyage. So this summer training was my first single-handed passage. The 3,500 miles to Svalbard and back. So 38 feet was about managing the boat. It was also about being able to navigate it around pack ice, having a slightly smaller vessel that I could maneuver faster if needed. And then it being made of steel is for ice sort of protection. There are boats up there in the Northwest Passage, certainly this year, that have gone through that are GRP. But being single-handed, having a slightly different watch keep sort of schedule to what a crewed vessel would have. Obviously, I don't plan on driving her into ice, but it would be nice to know that she could gently bounce off something if I needed to. So, yeah, mostly for strength and maneuverability and my own handling of the boat alone.
Okay, my turn then. What is your plan for overnight? Are you gonna hove to each night?
No, so it's going to depend very much on where I am geographically and the conditions, right? So. This year, when I sailed from Norway to Longyearbyen, that was 7 days there and 7 days back. At no time in those 7-day passages did I ever sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. So 20-minute nap, get up, check everything, make sure everything's good, keep the boat moving, go down for 20 minutes, get up again. Which is what I'll do in most areas of open water to keep the timing, keep the boat moving fast enough for me to get around both the Northwest and Northeast passages within such a tight sort of time constraint. But then there's areas, excuse me, like the Northwest Passage, where when the current turns against you, it's so strong that it's hardly worth fighting. So in areas like that, potentially dropping anchor so as not to lose ground backwards, or hoving to if I can get myself out of some of the current. But then again, what you don't want to have happen is for me to get iced into a bay whilst I'm at anchor. So the plan is to keep the boat moving as much as possible, with hove tos, anchorages when I need longer rests. And potentially there will be the need to refuel the boat a couple of times, depending on how much wind there is and how much sailing I can realistically do, at which point a longer sleep tied up alongside the dock would probably come quite well wanted.
Yeah, and well deserved by that point, I'm sure. What are the paper charts like in terms of your confidence with them? And I guess perhaps he's asking like how you intend to carry them and how you tend to use them.
Yeah, paper charts for the vast majority of the Arctic Circle are not massively reliable at the best of times. So I do have quite a few from previous boats that have done the Northwest Passage, that have kindly sent me their charts where they've drawn their corrections on them and things that they've seen, and local knowledge from sailors that have been out there before. I'm looking into the electronic charts, a bit harder to try and source those for Russia, but I'm also speaking to the Russian Deputy General of Navigation for the Northeast Passage. Don't ask me how I ended up with his email address, because I don't know. But he's talking about getting me Russian charts as well. So hopefully those will come from a more reliable source. But a lot of it is going to be electronic. It's going to be relying off of slightly older charts, whatever I can get my hands on. Also, we've got to remember that, this is an environmental awareness campaign at its core, and to print off a paper chart for every single bit of water that I'm going to be sailing through would be an awful lot of trees, an awful lot of charts to carry, and not particularly necessary for every single part of it. So one of my sponsors is a company called David Store Navigational Management, DSNM, and they provide super yachts with their charts, and expedition vessels with their charts, and cruise ships with their charts, that sort of stuff. So they'll be providing me with the paper charts that I need for ports of refuge, potential anchorages and contingencies, but then using electronic charts for areas of more open water, areas that are slightly deeper in particular. Yeah, a big mix of both, really, depending what part of the Arctic I'm in.
And like, certainly for us in Antarctic waters, we often found that even when there were charts, the data on them was so old, and the ice had receded so much that they were like seriously out of date anyway. And even like the positions on them would sometimes be up to like 5 miles out. So we were always relying much more on other skills, just looking at the depth sounder all the time, having your depth alarm set up, and like relying on other skills other than or using your whole like abundance of skills as
yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I'm doing with both the Scientific Exploration Society but also the International Seakeepers Society is that I will be depth sounding the seabeds for the Seakeepers Society Seabed 2030 project. So wherever I sail, they will have an accurate 2025 measurement of the depth of the water for me to bring back to help them update these charts and learn more about what's really up there, I suppose.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Are you expecting to meet other boats doing the round?
I don't expect to see anyone else attempting the full circumnavigation. I think if anyone else was going to, I probably would have heard from them by now. But I do expect to see other boats doing the Northwest Passage for sure. The Northeast Passage, obviously, once we start thinking about Russia and the state of the world at the moment, I don't think that there's a vast group of people attempting Russian territories. But the Northwest Passage is becoming more and more popular. Lots of Facebook groups that I'm in that are all, went up there this year, are going again next year. So yeah, I also went and did a sort of polar code training course where we learned about using your radar to navigate through ice and that sort of stuff, and met captains of quite a lot of cruise vessels that go up there. And one of them said, make sure that you sail past us on a Sunday so we can bring you a roast dinner in our tender and that kind of stuff. So I'm sure there will be other boats that I will sail past, but yeah, plan to be very much left alone once I'm in the Russian side of things, I think.
Oh, well, that cruise ship sounds so nice. Definitely write down their names.
It make a nice change from the freeze-dried food that I'm
Oh,
going to be living on.
is that what you're planning to live off of? It's not, is it?
Mostly that and pasta, yeah. Because I've got to fit it on a boat. She's a little boat for a long trip, so yeah, the smaller the packet of food, the better.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I can put you in touch with Kirsten about provisioning.
Yeah, I read about her glass jars that she was provided with, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, they were cool. She was lucky. And, well, actually, this brings us on nicely to Angus's question, which is, what creature comforts are essential to your trip?
Chocolate in multiple formats. So I don't drink tea or coffee. Hot chocolate is my only source of hot drink. So I've actually partnered with the Adventurous Drinks Company, and we've made our own hot chocolate, which is in recycled little cartons, where one little carton is 1 cup. So that's pretty cool. So there'll be quite a lot of that squirreled away in the bilges. And oh yeah, no, chocolate's where it's at. It's got to be. Yeah,
Chocolate and
yeah. Yeah.
Fair enough. Speaking of the hot chocolate, then this is all flowing on very nicely. But how are you worried about getting cold? Lots of people must be wondering that. Are you worried about getting cold? Has You either got any kind of heater on board?
Yeah, so Yeva does have a diesel heater. Now, in the 2 years I've lived on the boat and the sail to Longyearbyen and back this year, I've still not used it. I've only ever turned it on to make sure that it still works, rather than heat the boat with it, even through British winters in the water here in Portsmouth, which I think boils down to the fact that the insulation is excellent, because I ripped it all out and started again with it. So she's full of 50 mil Ceratex insulation throughout. I'm also a big fan of just sticking on an extra layer rather than turning on the heater. So Mustang Survival are the people who are kitting me up for the expedition. So I've got their full piece thermal suits to go under the wet weather gear and the rest. You know, hats and gloves, and yeah, it's certainly a risk, particularly with being outside during any sort of snow or storms that I might encounter. But that's part of the reason I chose a boat with inside steering. So hopefully I'll only have to be out in the conditions for sail changes or a better lookout. Hopefully keep myself inside as much as possible whenever needed. But that being said, you know, Longyearbyen this summer recorded temperatures of 22 degrees. So it's not like it might not be freezing the entire way around, you know what I mean? So we'll see.
Yeah, I found when I first went down to Antarctica to go work on pelagic australis, I was thinking the same, like, what do I need to take? It's surely going to be really, really cold. And following me down a month later was going to be one of my colleagues from in Scotland. And when I got there, he said to me, what do I need to bring? Tell me what it's going to be like. I said, sail in Scotland, you're going to be fine with this. If you got it inside wheelhouse, it's a game changer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was colder in Scotland when I got back from Norway than it was in Svalbard. So yeah. But yeah, always a risk. So you know, proper layers and staying inside as much as possible. I don't take caffeine supplements or drink coffee, but that being said, I've never drunk coffee my entire life, so I've never, you know, had to give it up or find out another method. If I'm really in the slumps, I might have a Red Bull, but I'm trying not to do that either. So most of it is keeping yourself occupied. I think it's quite hard to try and stay awake when you're super fatigued if you're just sat in the captain's chair in the doghouse looking out the window. So I'll make sure that I'm standing up in the cockpit and hand steering or doing whatever I can. But realistically, the best way of doing it is any time you have 20 minutes, go and get your head down. You know, 20 minutes sleep takes priority over reading a book or putting on some music or watching a movie. You've got to be quite meticulous about making sure that you are getting those 20 minutes as often as possible. But it averages out to anywhere between sort of 2 to 5 hours of sleep a night, or over a 24-hour period anyway. So yeah, so far I've managed to maintain that for up to about 7 days. I could push it probably to about 10 days, and then after that I'd need a serious sleep, a good 8 hours or 9 hours to be able to keep going. So I don't plan on having to maintain it for more than a week at a time if I have things my way, obviously. It took a long time to figure out that sort of information. It's not something that you can find easily. Luckily for me, I do have friends of friends or people who know Russians, who, you know, contacts, who have managed to get me in touch with the Russian Deputy General of Navigation for the Northern Sea Route, they call it, rather than the Northeast Passage. So although I can't pronounce his name to save my life, he has been very lovely and very helpful, and has put up with me emailing him for about 18 months now to make sure that I've got everything I need. So this year, when I intended to sail around the Arctic this year, he had approved the boat and my passage plan for the Northeast Passage. And I also had managed to secure a tourism visa from the Russian embassy, which meant that I could stop to refuel in Russia as well if I needed to. I very much have high hopes that I'll secure all of those documents again for next year. And then it's the last bit of niggle that I'm trying to figure out is when I sailed into Russia. So I figured out if I'd have sailed into Russia from the Norwegian coast this year, for example, there's a latitude and longitude you have to cross at a particular time and radio the Russians, and they meet you there and they check your boat and your papers, etc., before they let you proceed any further. What I need to figure out is that latitude and longitude for approaching from the Alaskan side. So that is on my job list of things to iron out this winter. But as far as permits and passage planning and boat approvals go, I'm quietly confident I'll get all those reapproved again for next year, having not used them this year. So I spoke briefly about how we're depth sounding for the seabeds. Now that's a very, very small bit of equipment that's almost basically just a SIM card that you put into your chart plotter that works in conjunction with your depth sounder as well. So that's a very tiny bit of equipment. But what I'm going to go to the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton and be taught how to use is the equipment I'm going to be using for doing microplastic sampling. So I'm going to be doing that in sort of one sample, give or take, every 1,000 miles or so, which will be slightly more intricate equipment. I haven't seen it yet. They want me to go and be taught by the scientists running the program how to use it properly. Fair enough. So I'll be heading out there hopefully in the next couple of months. It's just down the road, really, Southampton. And then the sonar around the ice isn't something that I've had to deal with yet, having not sailed in it. But it is something that I'm going to be bringing up with Ray Marine, who have been quite hands-on with me in the equipment on the boat. Because I noticed we put a new depth sounder in Yeva pre-sea trials this summer, and I noticed that it takes as little as a bubble in a wave for the thing to stop reading. It gets very upset. It's very super sensitive. So I'm going to chat to them about that and see whether the sensitivity of that can be adjusted, whether we can whether that's going to be reliable for where I'm going or not. So yeah, more stuff to work out over the winter, really. One of the primary objectives is going to be to keep the boat moving as much as possible. That's going to be one of my best lines of defense. In the off cases where I do have to stop or anchor against the currents, like we were talking about earlier, then it will be a watch keep. Eyes, ears, common sense. I have undertaken gun training, but I've decided I don't think I'm actually going to take a gun with me, none the least because of trying to get permits for firearms for international waters. What with Canada, the US, Russia, it's all quite nerve-wracking areas to be sailing through with a gun. So we're now looking at getting in some flare guns onto the boat and additional handheld flares, the usual little poppers and bangers and stuff like that. The boat also essentially didn't have a companionway hatch when I bought her. She had a piece of perspex that you could just lift up and walk away with. So when I had the companionway hatch built in, I had a washboard system done along with a sliding roof that I can lock from the inside as well. So if things really do hit the fan, I might be able to stay inside a bit longer. But yeah, no, trying to keep moving, trying to admire wildlife from a safe distance is very much the plan.
Don't take this the wrong way. But why hasn't anybody done this trip before?
I think there's quite a few reasons. One, because it's going to be difficult and dangerous. Two, because physically it hasn't been achievable. Until we've seen the sea ice decline that we've witnessed over the last sort of 3-4 years, which is when I started dreaming it up. It's also a admin nightmare of hoops to jump through, visas to get, countries to appease, and permits. I don't know, quite a few different reasons, but someone's got to be first, right? So.
And then finally, you're about to become an inspiration to a whole lot of people if you pull this off. So it would be really great to know who you look up to in the sailing world, and have you got any like role models that have influenced you?
Yeah, absolutely. Loads, from professional to family. Kirsten Nostschaefer is someone that I've admired since her Golden Globe. All of the crew of Maiden that pulled that off. Pip Hare, who's out on the Vendée now. I've got her book upstairs. I've just started reading. But it comes closer to home than that as well. My late grandfather was a sailor who, at my age, single-handed the Amazon River for just shy of a month. And he grew up, brought up my mum around boats, and both my parents got me on the water young. So Yeah, and then instructors that taught me up to my YMI qualification. You know, there's one out in the Canary Islands called Natalie, who's always been. She was the first female instructor that I ever met that sort of opened my eyes to that being a possibility for us. And then Martin Andrews from Sail Squad down in the Hamble has been one of the biggest champions and supporters of me overtaking his career almost. You know, he's pushed me for pursuing what I want to do since I met him. So yeah, loads of wonderful support.
Oh, Ella, we've absolutely loved having you. It's been so
Thank
good.
you.
I'm so glad you joined us. I just thought I'd email you on the off chance, and I'm so glad you said yes, because it's
No, I love it. Anytime.
one of my favourite sessions of the year so far.
Give you another session when I get back.
Oh, please, we'd be honoured.
Yeah.
That'd be amazing. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and especially Ella. Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it.
Okay, Charlie, when the house bears about 270 degrees.
To work out our distance from the lighthouse and use that.
We might be perfectly on track, but if we're not on time...
Have a look, I've got my phone here at the effects it has on our steering compass. So our echo sound is working, we can find a contour and follow it nicely into port.
Our left hand is pointing towards the centre of the lull.